Hey everybody, I just wanted to jump in on this whole Tim Walz thing. Um, so, this guy, for one, said that if a wall was built to keep illegals from coming over, that he would, whatever the size of the wall was, would get a ladder that's double that height. So he said, like, if the wall is 20 feet, he'd get a 40-foot ladder. Which, for one, would be blatantly illegal because that would be blatantly essentially it would be aiding and abetting criminals, fugitives, because if you're coming here illegally, the second that you make an effort to come over here illegally, you're immediately now a fugitive. And also, not to mention the whole stolen valor. Yeah. This guy says we should ban the no civilians need weapons of war, which I carried in war, which, for one, so what war did you carry weapons of war in? Not to mention the fact that the AR-15 is not a weapon of war, because it started out as a civilian weapon. And then the military later adapted it and changed it a little bit and made their own version of it, essentially. But it started out during, like, Vietnam time. I believe they started... Originally, I believe they went to the military and offered them. And then the military was like, nah, we don't want that. And so then they just went on to make it a civilian weapon. And then, guess what? Later, the military was like, hey, this is actually a pretty good weapon. Let's adapt it for our use case. And so they went back and they changed a couple things, and they adapted it to use during Vietnam. Because I believe that is when they first started using the military version of the AR-15. Actually, I believe it was technically the AR-14, if I remember right, but there's not much difference. They're the same gun, basically. But anyways, so the whole idea of it being a weapon of war is completely wrong. Also, this guy never went to war. Yes, he did serve in the National Guard, but he deliberately, to get out of serving, and his own people that he served with, his unit was getting ready to be deployed to I believe it was Iraq. And so he ran off and joined Congress. And just left his unit without their senior leadership, which typically completely destroys a unit. But clearly he wasn't a good leader to begin with, because a good leader doesn't leave their people. And if you're not a good leader, then your unit's not gonna have that much of an issue. Except for with you. If they're found to no longer have you around. Where a unit whose leader is killed, typically that unit will just... The few exceptions are with, like, Marines. And a good chunk of the U.S. military. But typically, as has been shown with history, once you kill the higher up leadership, it completely disbands the military, because they cannot function. Because the second you kill the higher up leadership, which is why I say what we should do to end the Russian war is not, provide weapons to Ukraine or whatever. First, use threats. Be like, hey, back down or we'll come take your ass out. Instead, what we do is we say, okay, you still won't back down? And we show a slight bit of our power. We're like, okay, we're going to drop a bomb on one of your convoys. Take out one of the convoys. If they still don't back down, then you go in and you destroy Putin's ass. Take him out. He ain't a problem no more. And you completely take out every single one of their high-ranking military officers. Once you do that, their military is going to crumble. You can go in, you can set up a non-communist government and give the people chances to be free or to go back into communism. You kind of leave it open. But you majorly incentivize them remaining free and remaining a democracy or a republic, which is what we are. There's a difference. We do take place in some democracy, like we do have some democracy but a republic is essentially for the people, by the people. Not just majority rules, because the reason that a true democracy doesn't quite work is because if every single thing is left up to majority rules, then if you can just, you'll constantly have one side will just block the rest of the side from getting through to place a vote on it, and there won't be any way to stop that from happening. Where the reason that majority rules, we have a democracy for our elected officials. We elect our officials by a democracy. But it's not full just majority rules either. It is actually it is based on certain places have higher, I guess, essentially value points, are more densely populated, and so therefore they have a higher amount of so you can have the wide majority and still not win your elected seat, because you didn't win the states that are more densely populated. Enough of them, at least. That's how you can win, 55 states. No, nothing. I'm stupid. I mean, I'm not stupid, but you can win 35 states and still not necessarily win, depending on what states that you won. For instance, if you win 35 states and at least 3 or 4 of them are battleground states, which are those highly densely populated states, you're most likely gonna win. But anyways, so yes, we need to hammer Tim Walz on this stolen valor, because stolen valor is not somebody you want being the vice president. Because if the president were to die, the vice president would then become president. And you do not want stolen valor in the White House. Stolen valor is one of the most egregious things you can do, as far as something that is to some nations very trivial, very minimal, it's not that big of a deal. But no, stolen valor is a huge deal, because essentially what you're saying is, I have no respect for the people that died for my freedom. That's why stolen valor is so egregious. Because essentially, you're spitting on the grave of every single veteran that had died for your freedom, to protect your freedom, and keep you free. That is why we cannot let Harris Walz win this. Because if that's the case, we are letting veteran people who essentially spit on veterans' graves in the White House. We can't do that. Because, again, when you commit stolen valor, you are essentially spitting on every single grave of every single veteran that has died. Anybody that has died in combat or out of combat. As long as they have served, and especially served in a war capacity, even if they die a veteran and they don't die in actual combat, which they're still a veteran in that case, they're just a fallen hero first and foremost. If you're spitting on every single grave, and of course this is theoretical because you can't physically spit on every single grave of every person that has ever fought to keep us free, because some of those graves don't exist anymore, such as like some of the Revolutionary War graves. They don't exist anymore because of expansion and stuff like that. Anyways, but like, we can't let somebody who essentially has spit on every single hero that has fought to make and keep us free grave in the White House. Not to mention the fact that, again, they both have been vocal about banning quote-unquote assault weapons, which, again, not weapons of war. There is a difference, because they were civilian weapons before they were ever adapted for wartime use. More videos to come on the specifics of like the AR-15 in comparison to the military version of that, which, again, military came after the civilian version. I believe that they had offered the military it first, but the military passed it up because they were like, that's useless, or whatever, essentially. They didn't see a use for it, essentially. So they passed it up. They were like, nah, we don't care about that. And so then they went forward with making it a civilian weapon. And then later, the military was like, hey, that actually does work pretty good. Because at the time, we were still, I believe, using the M1 Grand, which was a bolt-action rifle, made mostly of wood. And when you think about it, Vietnam was essentially a giant swamp, most of what we were fighting in. Because Vietnam was not was not mostly like a city fight. It wasn't like anything like the European front, where you were constantly weaving in and out of cities. You did have, the like muddy trenches, but you weren't really you weren't really like in a literal swamp most of the time. Most of the time it was either trenches, which were muddy on the bottom, but you always typically kept your gun as clean as you could so that it didn't like jam up. But if you're in a quite literal swamp, essentially, it's going to be a lot easier for the wood to soak up that moisture and expand, making it to where you like can't open and close your bolt action as easily, because you've got less clearance to get past that wood. And that's probably why they ended up going with the AR-15. Well, the military version of that. Again, gonna do a full video about this later. So, more videos to come, especially now that it is the political, presidential race is very much so back on, where we have to really attack the policies of Harris, Walz, because here's the thing. Not gonna attack the people themselves, or like the people that like them or whatever. I'm attacking their ideology. I'm not attacking them. So before anybody gives me hate for you're a bigot or whatever, no, I am not attacking them. I am attacking what they stand for. And the fact that they have now gone back on some of the stuff they stood for, so that they look nicer to the more moderate people. But at the same time, when they're around the radicals from their group, they speak their very radical points again. And so it's like, we can't let them get away with just, oh, we're gonna pander to the centrists as much as we can, like hide the fact that we're very radical to the centrists, make them think that we're not radical, so that we hopefully get their vote. Yet, over here, we are, where the radicals are, we are showing how radically radical we are. Because they are very, 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 very radical. And what I mean by radical is they are about as left as you can get. And again, there's a difference between liberal and left. I'll do a video explaining that too. The difference between liberal and left. I will also explain the difference between old Democrat and new Democrat. More videos to come.